Hello, everyone. I'm speaking to you today from the Mongolian yurt that is in the backyard of our house. And it is a great place to get away and have some privacy to think and to pray and to record this video. It's too cold outside today to be out in the backyard doing that, so I'm glad I can bring you this video from here. The gospel reading for this Sunday is, to me, one of the most profound and important readings in the Bible. It was a reading that was used at my ordination and had great meaning for me then, and it has taken on even a deeper and slightly different meaning in the context of what we're all going through right now. I'd just like to read you the first part of the gospel for this Sunday. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be to you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. And the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." This reading means so much to me, particularly today, because like that first Easter Sunday, many people are feeling locked. They're locked down in different kinds of isolation. They may be mentally locked down in worry about people that are close to them that they can't really reach out to in the way that they would normally reach out to. They are living lives of fear behind closed doors. And what this reading says is that Jesus breaks down those barriers, comes through those locked doors, and appears to them and is present to them. And we just heard, and he said to them, "Peace be with you." And he showed them his hands and his side. This breaking through unexpectedly, I had an interesting experience with this last Easter Sunday morning. Tish and I were at home. We're not going to be seeing anyone. We were not going to be going out anywhere. We did talk to people on the telephone. But I opened the back door to go out to do something in the yard. And there on the screen door was a beautiful note from the neighbor across the street, whom we have actually only ever met once. And this person had gone to the trouble of making a beautiful drawing with Happy Easter and a lovely saying that may every sunrise bring you joy and may every sunset bring you peace. And I thought, first of all, I was shocked that somebody had come and put something on our door. But then I was deeply moved by the thought and the love that went into giving us that note, really from a total stranger. And so we felt joy at that. We felt excited about that. Can you imagine the joy and excitement that those first disciples must have felt when Jesus appeared in the midst of them and said, "Peace be with you"? And then the interesting thing is that he then showed them his wounds. He showed them his hands, his feet, and his side. He understood their fear and their suffering because he too had suffered. He showed them his wounds. He identified with them. He understood them deeply. And it doesn't say that he said too much else to them, but it was enough to be present, to be there with them, and for them to know that he had suffered and was, in a sense, being with them in their suffering. I'm reminded of a interesting story that I heard many years ago about a farmer who was out in his field, and it was early in the spring, and he probably shouldn't have been out there. It was pretty muddy, and he was trying to get this field worked, and he got his tractor stuck in the mud. One of his neighbors came along and saw his predicament and said, "Oh, well, I'll give you a hand." And he got his tractor out, and the two of them labored away to try to unstick this tractor. They, put boards underneath the wheels, and they pulled on it, and they pushed on it, and they did everything they could do, and nothing was going to move this big tractor out of the mud hole that it had got itself in. And finally, when they had just kind of got to the end of their tether, they both plunked down in the mud together and sat side by side, and they started to talk as old friends, companions, commiserating and talking about farming and what they were going to do next. At which point, one of the farmer's sons came along and saw these two guys sitting out in the mud, and he pulled up and he shouted out to his father and he said, "Dad, I thought you were supposed to be helping get that tractor out of the mud. What are you doing?" To which the father said, "Well, son, I'm mud sitting." Mud sitting. Well, sorry, but it really feels like there's a lot of mud sitting going on right now. We're in various ways, we're all stuck in a situation that we don't have a lot of power over. We can't control. We can't get ourselves unstuck from the bigger picture. However, we might actually be able to get ourselves unstuck from the way we're feeling about that. If we allowed the risen Christ to break through into our isolation, our worry. Remember, worry is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it doesn't get you anywhere. So if we can break into our worry, into our anxiety, into our fears, which we really can't do anything about, and allow Jesus to break into that situation, allow the risen Christ to break into that situation, we can hear those words ourselves. Peace be with you. How do we get to that point? I talked a few weeks ago about prayer. Prayer does not have to be complicated. We make everything more complicated than it needs to be. We talked about arrow prayers. When you feel desperate, or you feel anxious, or you feel worried, take a deep breath. Your breath controls your emotions. If you can become aware of your breathing, that is the first step to allowing yourself to become calm and peaceful, so that out of the depths of your soul, you might want to issue a prayer that is just simply help, or peace, or thank you. Whatever your need is, just let it well up. Maybe you're concerned for your children. Maybe you're concerned for yourself. Just keep it simple and let that prayer bubble up. The book of Acts seems to indicate that when those disciples were huddled down in fear, not knowing what to do next, they were praying. And I would suggest that that is what perhaps we could be doing in our own ways when we feel anxious, when we feel afraid. Allow your prayers to be simple enough to just simply open yourselves up, so that the risen Christ can come into your situation, into your life at that moment, and whisper deep, deep into your soul, peace be with you. Amen.
Good morning, Long Point Bay. It's a real pleasure to be with you on this second Sunday of Easter. I want to share with you how to come at least how I come at the experience of Easter. And let me start with a personal experience. And I used to do a lot of photography, much more than I do now, and was pretty much always outdoor wildlife photography, and specifically wildflowers, and especially in the spring. Love looking for the wildflowers. Um, they're plentiful if you look for them. If you don't look for them, you'll never find them. I've had people see me lying down on the ground and worried that something's happened to me and want to help me up. And then I say, no, I'm photographing this beautiful red flower. And then they go, oh, what red flower? They don't even see it until I point it out to them. So it's small flowers. And the two that I was looking for here in Brantford, end of March, beginning of April, were the two, pretty much, at least for me, wildflowers in the spring. And that is bloodroot and adder's tongue. Very small. The flower would be probably no bigger than my thumb, maybe, or a little fingernail, thumbnail, fingernail. So you have to look for them. If you don't look for them, you'll absolutely miss them. So I looked and looked, and for weeks, nothing, not a sign of them, which just threw me because the trails that my wife and I walk on every day is through the bush, and it looks like places where these flowers would be. That's perfect. So I thought, well, maybe Brantford doesn't get adder's tongue or bloodroot. And then suddenly, about 2 weeks ago, we were out, and there they were. Not flowered, but the leaves were out. And it was and they were everywhere. Not just one or two, they were all over the place, just carpeting the ground. And then, probably 3 or 4 days ago, I began to see both bloodroot, nice, really, really pretty white flower. These days, the flower came out earlier when it was warm, but the poor flowers, in this cold, I'm sure they're going, oh my God, this is terrible, and then they cover up and protect themselves. So we've seen the flowers of the bloodroot, and I've just, in the last couple of days, discovered the flowers kind of coming out for the adder's tongue, but they really haven't opened up. It's just too cold. But they're there. My point is, I wouldn't have seen them if I didn't know to look, and if I didn't look carefully and consistently. And I think resurrection is like that, the experience of resurrection. If we're not looking for it and patiently, we'll miss it. We'll miss our own experiences or the experiences of others or the experiences that will help us to really understand that even in the midst of death, we're in life. And I think for me, that's really, really important these days, that we understand that we are in the midst of life, despite the appearance of death. So let me go to the Gospel of John. I want to deal with the Thomas story. But before I do that, I want to situate the time and circumstances for that story. And I want to do that so that we don't make the mistake of looking at this story as simply the report of a photographable event as it occurred. And I think that's the way, more often than not, the Gospels are read and understood. And certainly in this case, it's not a report of a photographable event. It's not history reported, I say over and over. This is faith proclaimed. So, the Gospel of John, written about the end of the first century of the Common Era, so 95 to 100 AD. So that's roughly 70 years after Jesus' death, and about 40, 50 years after the last gospel was written, and that was Matthew. And nowhere, and why I situate that and give you those dates, I want you to know that there is nothing in the other four Gospels, what are called the Synoptic Gospels, that has anything like the story of Thomas. So this is not something that John has seen someplace else. It doesn't exist someplace else. This exists only in John's Gospel. So the question is, what is John trying to tell us? Something that he has not seen, at least not in this fashion, in the other Gospels. So let me give you a little lead up. It's in John's Gospel, a lead up to the situation of the Thomas story. Jesus has died. Everybody knows that. And Jesus comes to the 12. He appears in the midst of the upper room. They're all with doors locked and bolted, and because they're scared. Because if this happened to Jesus, the pattern for the Romans is you not only kill the leader, you'll round up all the followers that could be a threat to you, and you'll execute them in the same fashion. So they're terrified. So they're in locked down mode. So Jesus appears in their midst, and Thomas isn't there. The disciples will later tell Thomas, "We've seen the Lord." And Thomas has this really great response. He's bold and he says, and he draws his line in the sand. And he says, "Unless this happens, I'm not going to believe." And he says what's got to happen. I need to see him with my eyes. I need to put my hand in the wounds. I need to touch and feel, and then maybe I'll believe. So what occurs then after that, the telling from the disciples that Jesus had appeared to them, and Thomas draws his line in the sand. Again, the disciples are in the upper room, the doors are bolted, and Jesus comes into their midst. And if I were Thomas, I'd go, uh-oh. But Jesus doesn't berate him. Jesus doesn't put him down in any way, shape, or form. What he says is, "Thomas, come here." Basically, he then says, do what you need to do to believe. You need to do what you need to do to believe. So, bring your hand here. Take a good look. And put your hand, do the touch, do what you said you needed to do. So Jesus allows Thomas to set Thomas's agenda, and Jesus works with Thomas's agenda. So Thomas does. He comes, he puts his hand in the wounds, and what I would have expected in that event was for Thomas to have said, "Oh, Jesus, it really is you. Oh, you are alive. Oh, that's wonderful. This is great. This is really good news." That's not what he says. What Thomas says is, "My Lord and my God." And I go, oh. I would have understood the, "Oh, Jesus, it's you." That would make sense. But he's gone far beyond recognizing that this person standing before him was the one that he had been following. Jesus of Nazareth. And he makes the most profound statement, faith statement, in all of the New Testament. "My Lord and my God." That's an incredible faith statement. And why is that really, at least for me, it is critical. Would I make that faith statement now? Yes, I would. I'm not sure I would have in my earlier days, but now I would. What are the consequences of what Thomas is saying? Because I think we really do need to take the gospel seriously, all of the gospels, and all parts of it. And what Thomas is saying by "my Lord and my God," what he is saying is that now, for him, Jesus is the face of God for him. Jesus is the voice of God for him. Jesus is the experience of God with us, of Emmanuel, for Thomas. Is Jesus that for me? That should be the question that each one of us needs to deal with. And I have to say, yes. And in particular, what it means for me when I look at Jesus seriously and the whole of the Jesus experience in the New Testament, and I say this more and more, there is never a time anywhere in any of the Gospels that Jesus punishes anyone. Think about that. Jesus never punishes anyone. If that's the face of God for me, if that's the voice of God for me, it is a voice that does not punish. It is a voice that does not condemn. Jesus doesn't berate Thomas for being a doubter. Doubting Thomas. That's not a bad thing for Jesus. He accepts Thomas for who he is, and he works with Thomas as he is, the one who questions, the one who doesn't believe easily. And he invites him into a deeper journey. If you know anything about crucifixion, and again, I want to say, Jesus is one who consistently accepts us for who we are, as we are, without punishment, without condemnation. Not just in the Thomas story. Go to the worst moment in Jesus' life, and that's got to be his crucifixion. And just in case you don't really understand what crucifixion is all about, sometimes they used nails, but more often they didn't use nails because that's metal and that's hard to come by. They are tied to a cross, but they are affixed to a cross beam, and that cross beam is then planted by the side of the road. Crucifixions always were done in full view. There was one point at which there were over 2,000 crucifixions in one day, and they all lined the road that led into Rome. Rome's clear statement to the population: you mess with us, that's what's going to happen to you. Take a good look. It was brutal. It was horrendous. People did not die quickly when they were crucified. 3-4 days for them to die was not unusual. And what killed them was not bleeding out. What killed them was asphyxiation. You're hung up on a cross, strapped onto it, and when you hang down, when your weight of your body pulls you down, your lungs are pressed. They can't expand. They can't open up. They can't get the oxygen that the body needs. And so the person has to lift themselves by their arms, lift themselves up so that the chest can expand and they can get air. How long can you keep doing that? Day, 2, 3. It's a long, lingering execution. So Jesus is being crucified, and what does he say? In the midst of that horrendous experience, Father, forgive them. They have no idea what they're doing. Forgive them. If there was any place that Jesus would have condemned, that would have been it, I would think. but he forgives. And you know the story of the thief that's crucified with him. This day you'll be with me in paradise. He says to somebody that's a thief. He's being justly condemned for a crime, and Jesus says, and when the thief says, just remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus basically says, howbeit join me. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. And what does that mean for us? If I believe in Jesus, if I believe that he is the face of God, the voice of God, the experience of what God is like for me, what should be the consequence of that? It seems to me that I need to be forgiving as well. I need to be as compassionate, at least as compassionate as I can possibly be, as Jesus is. And Jesus trusts us enough to do that. Because in his commissioning, that it's at the end of Matthew's Gospel, he commissions his followers. As the Father has sent me, so I send you. Do you believe that? As God trusted Jesus, Jesus trusts us. To be compassionate, to be forgiving, to be the experience of new life. May Easter be yours. May the gift of resurrection and new life fill your life. And may you in turn be the second coming and bring that life and that gift to those that you meet and who will meet you. God bless, and wonderful, joyful, life-giving Easter. Amen.